strong always vanquish the weak. You have only your own frailty to blame. Well. It seems behind that you've put up quite a fight. I underestimated just how desperately the fool cling to life.
It has been 2 years since I did a Sonic diagnosis video, and I thought, how am I going to bring this back? Who else can I analyse? Because honestly, there's no one to analyse much. But, alas, we have Infinite. In my last video, I talked a lot about Infinite, but I didn't talk about his mentality. That's what this video is for. So, welcome back to Sonic Diagnosis, Episode 2. We are now talking about Infinite and how he has PTSD. So, Infinite's a really interesting character, and I'm glad that I've finally been able to put my finger on what the heck is wrong with him. Because I like analysing the villains more than the heroes, which is why this series has not continued for 2 years. So, when I talk about Infinite having PTSD, I'm also thinking about the fact he has dissociation. So I'll talk about that in a minute. First, I'm gonna just go down the list of PTSD symptoms that Infinite shows in the game. So, because there's not a lot of focus on Infinite, we can't really explore his psyche too much, since a lot of the things we see of him are just from other characters' perspectives. Now, the 3 main types of symptoms are re-experiencing the trauma through intrusive, distressing recollections of the event, flashbacks, and nightmares. Again, we don't know if he does go through that, so I'm not going to say, yeah, he probably does because he's got PTSD, and no, he doesn't because we don't see it. So I'm going to leave that one up in the air for a while, until we do understand more of this character. Emotional numbness and avoidance of places, people, and activities that are reminders of the trauma. Now, he does have an emotional numbness. He's definitely not the same as he used to be, because if you remember in the flashback from episode Shadow, he was shaking, he was terrified, but then he became this calm creature that couldn't feel anything. But he doesn't avoid places. He is still seen around the mystic jungle area where he fights other characters. He directly confronts Shadow, so he doesn't try and avoid the trauma, but there is that emotional numbness. Then it says there's an increased arousal such as difficulty sleeping and concentrating, feeling jumpy, and being easily irritated and angered. Again, this is all a bit up in the air because we don't see Infinite sleep. Like that, I don't think we've seen any character sleep really. He seems to have a good level of concentration because obviously he's the one in control of the Phantom Ruby. He doesn't seem to feel jumpy because he's obviously very calm, that's his whole character. And being easily irritated and angered, he looks like he does get very irritated by characters like Sonic. And I think the main irritation comes from the fact that he's got friends and he's got this carefree personality which Infinite no longer has. I mean, he probably never did feel the same as Sonic, obviously. They don't seem to be that kind of... He doesn't seem to be that kind of character, but at the same time, he probably was friends with his squad. And throughout the whole game, all he talks about is how friends suck. That's all he talks about. How friends let you down, how friends are doomed to make you weak. And that reflects him as a person. So, let's look down this list furthermore. So, more symptoms of PTSD. So there's recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic events. Now, again, this is something we don't know. We can't be sure if he has distressing memories of the event. But there is one thing that I think does link to this. So, in episode Shadow, which is probably the most important episode regarding Infinite's character as opposed to the main story, he bursts out saying that he's not weak when he is first confronted by Shadow before he takes on his new identity. He starts screaming it repeatedly, I'm not weak, I'm not weak. He just keeps saying it, and it's kind of a funny scene, it's very memeable. Lots of people like to make jokes about it, but if you think about it, it's pretty deep. It's a bit weird to have his main focus being on, hey, I'm not weak, therefore I'm gonna destroy the world, but I think Sega couldn't really say anything about it being like, oh, you killed my squad, I'm gonna destroy the world, whatever. I think that was a bit too intense, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, so that whole I am weak speech he does, that repetition of it, that comes back again in the virtual reality level of episode Shadow, where he basically takes control of Omega, or the illusion of Omega, whatever, and makes Omega start saying, I'm not weak, I'm not weak, repeating Infinite's own words. So Infinite is constantly reminding himself that he's not weak, which links back to the day he dealt with the trauma of losing the squad and being defeated. So that's the only thing I'll say about the whole recurring memories of traumatic events. He repeats that phrase, and I think he does repeat it throughout the story as well. Not quite in the same way of saying, I'm not weak, but it talks about how the weak will always be defeated. The strong will conquer the weak. People who are weak deserve to die, even though he himself was once weak, and he even acknowledges that he used to be weak. The next point is recurring distressing dreams, in which the content or effect of the dream is related to the events. Again, we don't see as dreams, but that could link to the virtual reality thing again, because a virtual reality is obviously like an illusion, kind of like a dream, and in there he projects his I am not weak, but he does it to Shadow, not to himself. But still, I think it could link. Flashbacks or other dissociative reactions in which the individual feels or acts as if the traumatic events are recurring. Again, I'll just say the I am not weak thing again, because he threw that out months after he experienced the trauma. Intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic events. I mean, I don't really know what to say about this one. I don't want to just keep saying the I am not weak bit, because that's getting old already. He doesn't really show distress at all. Like, that's just not his thing. I'm going to say it again. He constantly does remind the player and the other characters that weakness deserves to be punished, and I just feel like that's all linked to what's going on in his own head. Then there's physiological reactions to reminders of the traumatic events. I don't know. Oh, yeah, that's what I want to talk about. The one thing, let's think about this now. One thing we didn't see throughout the game, which I was hoping for, was his mask to be taken off. Not just to see his face, but how he would react to having someone pull off that mask. How would he physically react? This is where I think maybe he would completely freak out. Because obviously he abandoned his old identity, and his whole thing is that he abandoned his old face, his weak face. So if someone took off that mask, would he then revert to being his old self? Would he then be traumatized? Would something happen? That was something I really wish we could have seen in the game, where like Sonic knocked his mask off in the final boss fight or whatever, but no, we didn't see it. So that's just my own theory about how he'd probably react, but I just find it interesting how he never takes his mask off, and he constantly likes to tell people, look, this mask is my new face, my old face is gone. Which it isn't, it's just another mask. So more symptoms to do with PTSD. Inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event. So again, we don't see Infinite ever talk about it. I don't know if that's because he doesn't remember it or because he just doesn't like talking about it, but who knows. So again, that's up in the air. Persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, others, or the world. Now that is one that's very important. I'm glad I got to this one actually. So the examples here are, I am bad. No one can be trusted. The world is completely dangerous. That really does hit the nail on the head for Infinite's character. How many times does Infinite go around saying, you shouldn't have friends, they make you weak. Your friends are your weakness, they let you down. The world is where the strong conquer the weak. That's how the world works. The world is a horrible place. That is all he says throughout the game. So he's very negative about the world and friendship and all positive things. Granted, that is just a thing most villains are like in general. You know, Eggman probably goes around saying no one needs friends when you have robots and stuff like that, but I just feel like it's key for Infinite's character because we know he's changed from a past experience. Persistent, distorted blame of self or others about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events. He does blame Shadow. He really blames Shadow for what happened to him. Now, it's interesting that he doesn't take it all out on Shadow, but Shadow's the first person he goes to. And one thing I find interesting about Infinite's character is just how much he focuses on Shadow. Like, for someone who claims to have given up that past identity of his, he really despises Shadow. So as much as he goes around saying, no, that's not me anymore, I'm someone completely different, he hates Shadow for what Shadow did to him and his squad. So there's that kind of contradictory attitude he has. So he blames Shadow. I don't know if he blames himself for what happened to his squad, but he might do because he was very visibly upset about it in the cutscene before it became infinite. Persistent fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. I don't know. We don't know who fears anything. He seems to enjoy smelling fear, but no. I don't know. I think that's a no for infinite on that one. Maybe anger. He does have some anger, but he's calm most of the time. Markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. He gets involved with taking over the world and stuff, so I don't think that really applies to his character either. Feelings of detachment or estrangements from others. Again, I think that definitely hits nail on the head for infinite. So he does hang around Eggman a lot, and he doesn't seem to have any problems interacting with him. But overall, he doesn't really see himself as part of anybody, really. He doesn't consider anyone his friend or really an ally. He doesn't really refer to Eggman as a boss or an ally. He just kind of goes along with what he's doing because it suits his own interests. And he sort of acts like an observer. He sort of floats around looking at people, watching them struggle. Sometimes he doesn't even get involved that much. He just likes to watch them struggle. And you know, like how he lets characters live after they defeat him. He just observes them. He just goes, right, you win, I could kill you, but instead I'm going to watch you struggle from back over here. So I think that feeling of detachment definitely does apply, and also due to the fact that he does refer to himself as someone completely different to the Jackal he used to be. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions. I mean, that's a hard one because he doesn't feel positive emotions, but he seems to really enjoy killing people, and I'm pretty sure that joy is a positive emotion, so that's difficult. Again, let's just say that it does sort of apply, but not too much. So, the last few things on this whole list of post-traumatic stress disorder is irritable or aggressive behaviour. I mean, he does show some signs of frustration throughout the game. If he's getting defeated, he definitely goes into this sort of lash-out mode. But when he's on top, he's very calm, collected, but then he still has some chip on his shoulder, so yeah, that could definitely apply to him. Reckless or self-destructive behaviour. That's a hard one, because that obviously refers to things like serious problems. Like, that refers to things like drinking and stuff, I'm guessing. And that's definitely not present in a Sonic game. But with Infinite, I think his self-destructive behaviour is letting Eggman experiment on him, which is what happened. He gave himself up to Eggman afterwards and said, look, my squad's gone, I've been screwed over by Shadow, basically. Just do everything you can to give me power, regardless of what it does to me. And then he became this monster with the Phantom Ruby, and he was basically no longer a Jackal, he was a weapon. He even says it in his theme song, he's a weapon. But yeah, I think that actually does apply to Infinite now that I think about it. Hypervigilance. Hypervigilance. He says he can smell fear, and he can recognise fear. And I think the main thing is because he understands what fear is, because he felt it himself. He felt it to an extent that was like, whoa, I never knew I could feel fear. He even looked confused when he felt it. So when he looks at other characters, he says, I can smell your fear, I can sense your fear. He can feel that. I think that, yeah, if I'm reading it right, I think that should be able to apply to him. Exaggerated startle response. No, not Infinite. Problems with concentration, that's come up again. I don't think that can be associated with Infinite, because obviously he's got to keep all of those illusions up. He does take down Sonic originally, so he's got a lot of concentration. Difficulty falling or staying asleep or restless sleep, that's come up once more, and again, we don't know, we don't see him sleep. The only time we see him sort of sleeping might be when he's in that capsule, but that doesn't count. So that is the whole list of PTSD. And again, lots of the things can be applied to Infinite. But now I'm going to talk about dissociation, because dissociation can come from having PTSD. So let me just read this out. Dissociation disrupts 4 areas of personal functioning that usually operate together smoothly, automatically, and with few or no problems. Identity, memory, consciousness, self-awareness, and awareness of surroundings. Breaks in this system of automatic functions within yourself cause the symptoms of dissociation. So, I think the big red word on there is identity. Infinite does not have his original identity. He's given it up ever since the trauma. He refuses to believe he is the same Jackal as the one Shadow defeated. Memory, I'm not so sure. Perhaps he does remember that his squad was killed, perhaps not. I mean, he just seems to heavily imply he does still have all his memories, because he obviously remembers Shadow. And to be honest, his memory seems way too good I don't know if that's a thing to do with PTSD, but one thing I've noticed about his character is he spends a lot of time remembering people. So look at Shadow, for example. He has no idea who Infinite is. He does not remember taking out Jackal Squad at all, which Infinite then just says, oh, well, that's okay because we were weak anyway. But Infinite can remember the Avatar's face when the Avatar was among so many other people he slaughtered. He remembers letting him live. I just find that really interesting how he remembers letting the Avatar live, and even says, I remember you, you're the one who ran away from me before, when Shadow can't even remember the leader of the squad he destroyed. I just find that really interesting. I just thought I'd bring it up now that memories come up. So, common symptoms of PTSD-related dissociation. Having flashbacks to traumatic events. Again, we don't know if he has flashbacks, but I mentioned earlier about how he goes into that big I am not weak rant, and how he can repeat himself for it, or how he sometimes implies it through other ways of speaking when he says things like, no, I'm not weak, I'm strong, that's why I'm gonna win, because I'm strong. Feeling that you're briefly losing touch with events going on around you, similar to daydreaming. Well, he does have that weird illusion thing going on. I do sort of wonder what would happen if he didn't have the Phantom Ruby, because that creates the world for him. The world is his. He makes the world his own world. Yet, without that, what is he? He just sees the world as it really is. So I feel like that can link to his whole PTSD thing. Blanking out or being unable to remember anything for a period of time. I don't think so. I mean, can I just say null space? I'm gonna bring up null space right now. Because null space is created by the Phantom Ruby and it's a place of nothingness. But what if it's actually created by Infinite? Because we never saw it in Sonic Mania. What if Infinite created this null space, this empty world? What if that is like his world? I don't know, I just think, do you think maybe that place of nothingness, that place of emptiness, that could reflect something within Infinite? I just thought I'd talk about that briefly. You can talk about that in the comments if you want, but you know, I do wonder about null space. Definitely. So, this goes further on to talk about what happens when PTSD-related dissociation is more severe. The definition of dissociation in PTSD also includes the experience of some people with PTSD who have additional symptoms called depersonalization, feeling as if the world is not real, and derealization, feeling as if the self is not real. So, I find that really interesting actually. So, depersonalization, feeling as if the world is not real. He basically talks about how the world's an illusion in his theme song. He creates an illusion in the world. The whole world is his illusion. So he basically does feel like the world is not real, because it's not. He even says to other people it's their reality, not his own or Eggman's, it's theirs. And then derealization, feeling as if the self is not real. I mean, I don't really know about that one, but he does seem to imply that he is something not really of this world. So he's like, I'm Infinite, I'm someone completely different to who I used to be. So again, completely destroying his past self, who was the real Infinite. And he's like, well look, I'm a weapon, I'm not real, you know. It's so, he's a bit like that. But I don't think he ever goes down the path of, I'm an illusion, what's going on? So, again, I find that very interesting. Again, I talk about here about examples of depersonalization include out-of-body experiences where people see themselves from above. This lets them feel, this is not happening to me. So, okay, so depersonalization. So I talked about it being like the whole world to him doesn't feel real, but then sometimes he sees himself. So, I mean, he does create other versions of himself, doesn't he? Like those big ones you see in the capital city. So he does literally sometimes look at himself, and I think sometimes he might project himself in a way, like with the Avatar, when he recognises that fear, he could be seeing himself. And also the idea of him abandoning Zero, his old self, that's why I'm calling it Zero. The idea that he looks back at Zero, probably could look at him dead in the eye and just say, that's not me. I'm not weak. You know, that the whole I'm not weak thing. He is not weak. He cannot be defeated. He's never known defeat. He made Omega say that, I have not known defeat, when he clearly has. But he's saying, no, I've not known defeat. I've never been defeated by anybody. Don't lie to me. That would not happen. Infinite would not be defeated, but Zero would. I just find that really interesting. And then in states of derealization, people experience events that aren't real. This lets them feel, this isn't real, it's just a dream. Okay. Again, back to something I just said, he sees the world as an illusion. He even says this is an illusion in his theme song. The world is not real. I mean, it feels like it's more obvious now just by reading it. The people with PTSD who are more likely to have symptoms of depersonalization or derealization are found in all cultures. They mainly include those who are a male, Infinite is a man, I'm pretty sure he's a male character, have lived through repeated severe traumatic events before developing PTSD. Well, he did come from a mercenary squad. He probably did see a lot of stuff before this final thing happened to him, which was the worst thing because his actual squad was wiped out. Have other mental health problems, including suicidal tendencies. Well, I don't think Infinite's suicidal, but again, we can't be sure because we don't see him without his mask on. I feel like that mask gives him some kind of power. Like, not as in it gives him actual power like the Ruby does, but it gives him a mental power. It's his identity. Have some form of disability that interferes with daily living. I don't know. Actually, isn't Infinite blind in one eye? I don't know if I'm wrong about that. I know it doesn't really interfere with daily living, but Infinite has heterochromia, which makes his eyes different coloured, and he has a scar on his blue eye. So I'm beginning to wonder if it's actually heterochromia at all, because heterochromia is where you're born with two different eyes. But because he's got a scar down the blue eye, it just looks to me like he might have been blinded. And this is further implied when he wears the mask, because the eye, which would be the blue eye, is completely covered. So is he partially blind? I don't know. I'm just coming up with these things. So that's all of the PTSD and dissociative stuff that I had up on my screen, and I don't think that I need to look at any more because obviously it's just going to be repeating itself, that you're experiencing flashbacks and all that stuff. So overall, I definitely think Infinite has PTSD. I definitely think that. The way he depends so much on his new identity, the way he sort of looks back at his past self like, no, that's not me, and the way he repeats things that contradict something that happened to him, when he says things like, I'm not weak, I'm not going to be defeated, only the weak get defeated. And he looks back at his past self who got defeated, who lost his squad, who was terrified, shaking, visibly shaking, when Shadow was face to face with him. He looks at that past self and says, that's not me, that Jackal is weak. And he deserved to have been defeated. He completely forgets who he used to be. So I really think he does have PTSD. And in a way, it's, if this is actually an intentional thing, honestly, I think it's good that Sega have done that. There could be a whole new analysis of this where people analyse the whole dependency on the mask, how he depends on it so much, and how the actual world of Sonic Forces is his psyche. How it's become this dangerous war zone because that's how he sees it. How null space is how he feels or reflects something inside him, this emptiness that he's feeling. I just think it's so interesting. That's really interesting, actually. Holy. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's actually made me really excited. I don't know why. Like, that's really exciting to find that out. This has been a very long diagnosis of a character. This isn't like the sociopath one. This is like proper deep stuff. So, I mean, I don't know if any of people watching this have PTSD, but if you do, or you know someone who does, how do you feel about this character? If it actually was meant to be a physical embodiment of PTSD. If you were to look at Infinite and think maybe he had PTSD, would you like to think that he was relatable? I mean, actually, no, don't answer that question. I don't think anyone wants to relate to some maniac taking over the world. But do you think it's a good representation? Not good, because obviously he's doing bad things, but accurate. Because obviously people can do bad things from having PTSD. We've seen people in real life do bad things because of PTSD. So is it interesting that in a Sonic game that is aimed at children, do you think it's interesting that Sega might have actually covered something as serious as PTSD? Maybe they didn't do it, and maybe I'm just overanalyzing this. But personally, I think that's pretty cool, and it's pretty good that we could see something like this. My only problem is it's not explored enough, if they were intending to. But at the same time, I don't think it should be explored too much. Maybe Infinite doesn't have PTSD, maybe I really am just overanalyzing this. But I just would love to think that he did. And let's think that I'm right. That's just really cool. I don't know why I'm so excited about that. Why am I so excited? Oh well. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Maybe you think he's got an entirely different mental health problem. Maybe he's not got PTSD, maybe he's just a sociopath like Mephiles was. Maybe he's got a dissociative identity disorder where Infinite is actually a new personality taking over, and maybe when he takes his mask off, he's someone else, he's Zero. Who knows? I don't know. I don't work for Sega. I didn't make this character, I just made this video. Let me know in the comments. I do want to know your thoughts, because maybe I've just completely taken this character into a different universe when I shouldn't have done. So yeah, this has been Lord Danny on Sonic Diagnosis, and I'm signing out.